Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week as we usually do with a creator request. A smaller band gets in contact with me and asks me to check out their work. Today we have a group that I don't know much about. They didn't put much in the email. They're a small band from northern Germany, and that's about it. The group we're looking at today is called Basic Pigeon. We're going to be looking at the track Rustling Sand. Let's dive in. See what's going on with Basic Pigeon. Interesting progression there. Very cool effects on the guitars. There's so much hope in this track, but it's surrounded by so much filth and grit. Oh, dude, are they gonna do it again? I don't think so. There was parts of the vocal line where we were getting a stereo image before locking back into the single center channel. And it was almost like something blurring out of focus for brief moments. As much energy as there is on these instruments, the song itself is rather laid back. Yeah, a 3-3-2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Nice way to drive the energy forward without changing up the general rhythmic device anywhere else or the time signature. And we ramped all that energy up to pull it back in. Very cool. Yeah, a nice grungy alt-rock kind of track here with honestly a bit of noise element to it as well. There's a lot of dissonance in this track. We kind of explored less of it as we got into the meat of the song, but it wasn't completely ever gone. Harmonic instability is a huge element of this track, and to me it represents couple of things actually. It really depends on where it comes into the track. A lot of this song is gritty, it's gnarly, it's distorted, it's tense, dissonant. It feels like an atmosphere of grossness, of disgusting elements. And I think when I look at it through that lens, in these moments when it kind of becomes the atmosphere, we listen to the bass line and the vocals that sit in the middle of it. We hear melodic ideas that push towards hope, a light within all of this garbage. That's what I get through portions of this track. And I even mentioned that at I think it was around the beginning of the track, like 40 seconds in or something. There was definitely a feeling of brightness trying to escape from grit, from grime. But I think there was also moments when the gnarly elements, the distortion and the harmonic tension, they weren't so much the atmosphere as much as the focus. And it's almost as if the apathy or hope that came through, and I know those are very different things, we'll touch on that in a second, but where that was normally the center element, the focused element, we now had the grit. And maybe instead of an external feeling of grit, this is an internal one, an internal feeling of strife, of clash, of dissidence. It's an angst coming through. We don't just want something better. We're willing to fight for it. We're rubbing up against the atmosphere and creating something distressful out of that. I don't know what the lyrics are going for on this yet. We'll check that out in a little bit. But I do think it's interesting that the tension of this song, whether it is the tones of the guitars or the harmonic stress in this track, they seem to shift from external factors to internal factors, and it gives very different colorings of what it's supposed to represent as far as me, anyways, as far as my relationship to these sounds and interpreting them. I really enjoy that. Usually when I listen to stuff like this, there's more of a static take on it. If the vocalist is yelling, it's probably an angsty feeling, but if the vocalist isn't, no, the grit usually stays outside of the center. It's the atmosphere of it. It's very cool to see it kind of drifting in and out on this track and kind of changing my focus on it and what it represents. But I had mentioned hope and apathy. The melodic lines in this, I think, do have a general push towards rising. There's a lot of movement from lower pitches to higher pitches, and not, arpeggiating up, but making these big jumps. Yes, as the pendulum swings, we must come back down to make that jump again, but it's always starting on a lower place, moving to a higher. We very rarely start melodies on higher places and then come down to reset to the higher place. There seems to be a want or a need or some sort of growth, a rising up throughout that. But there's also so many sections that just kind of are. And I think when we pair this with the vocal delivery, which is lighter, it's got a bit of airiness to it. It isn't outwardly joyful, but it isn't melancholic either. It's not hopeful, but it's not hopeless. There's an apathetic element to it. Simply just having a low amount of energy and just doing the bare minimum to get this melody out. As if singing itself is draining energy from this person. Maybe apathetic is the wrong word. I think that implies a lack of emotion entirely, but it still is a lack of energy. And I don't think it's one because the narrator of this doesn't want to put that energy forward, but simply that they can't. They've expended so much energy elsewhere that at this moment when they're trying to get this stuff off of their chest, they just don't have a lot of reserve left to pull from. When you pair that with my read on the grit of this track, it creates an antagonistic element between our narrator and their world. One that they are passionate about, that they have hope to leave, that they have anger about being within, but an atmosphere that also drains them of energy to do anything about it. I really like that. Now, I may be completely wrong too. Basic Pigeon, if you're watching this and you want to correct me and be like, nah, that wasn't our intent at all, this was actually it, by all means, go for it. I'm just interpreting what I'm hearing. By no means do I believe this is the only interpretation, and no means am I going to say that this is what y'all had in mind when you were making it. But it is what I hear out of it, which is, of course, informed by my biases, my experiences, stuff like that. But I do enjoy that. And very rarely do I ever get to bring up how movement within the instrumentation alters my relationship to the vocal work. And I hear that here. I think it's very cool. There's also kind of a lot going on with the guitars. The drums have a nice variety of patterns going on in here, but a lot of it seems to be a little bit of syncopation against a core beat. A lot of it is a bit on the lighter side. It's not incredibly dense drumming. All of this makes sense for the style. It's quite possible on another track this drummer really gets to show off, but they're being a bit more reserved here for the song itself. If this had a lot of energy and forward momentum, it would be a very different track. But I had mentioned during the song that it almost feels rhythmically as if this track is simply existing. Not really much of a destination in mind, it just is. And a lot of this comes from a lack of drive, a lack of momentum. A lot of that's driven by, a lack of drive is driven by. Good words, Bryan. A lot of it, though, is informed by what the drummer is doing, and their reluctance to really get heavy into the drum work plays into that. The bass line, though, we do have constant eighth notes through a lot of this, but it's a bit muted. I think it's finger-picked too, so we don't have a lot of energy from the attack. It's a bit of a softer strike at the beginning. That also informs a lightness and a lack of energy, which is played off of what I was talking about earlier about the way that the vocals sit against the atmosphere. But then you get the guitars. There's a lot of energy here right from the very start. We have slight dissonance, mostly consonance between the two guitars, and they take that and bring it down into this very tense dyad between the two. Then you rise it back up, and it feels like a release. We're pulled out of that into something more harmonious, but we can't ignore the fact that these notes that these guitars are playing are not completely stable. There is tension in the harmonies they're playing. It's just not as stressful as where we were previously. We bounce back and forth between these, and then we drop the sound down, and the left guitar just hammers home this one tone, and the right guitar bounces back and forth between a less stable and a less tense and a more tense note, but both of these are way more aggressive than the original first. Not that aggressive, but more palatable sound. This is a series of sounds, of collection of notes that are based around how much tension can we pull in here and what storytelling can we tell out of levels of tension. There is no pure release here. I found this interesting that if you listen to these two guitars throughout the track, you're going to hear a lot of stuff like this. What are they actually doing? The notes that they're playing, the riffs that they have, there's a lot of chordal work in here. And I'd say that on the whole, the skill required to perform these parts it's not a high skill level. I don't think there's a lot of technical expertise in here, but much like what I was talking about with the drummer, it is absolutely critical to informing the emotions and storytelling of this song. A lot of this is a bit of a heavier movement through tense chords. And the two guitars are rarely on the same page, creating strife between them. There is even more friction in this track because the two guitars are kind of doing their own things. Similar, but different. And it allows the harmonic instability in this track to be a consistent factor, one that is more stable in some places and less stable in others, but not perfectly harmonious. And I really enjoy that because there's also texture play that goes into that. As I've talked about on the channel before, things like harmonic instability and dissonance are amplified by amplification and overdrive and distortion. These are all elements that are going to take the grit that you're getting from the harmonic instability and ramping it up into 10. So there's playfulness of how much grit should be on the guitar, how much overdrive should there be, how light should this tone be. This guitar, I don't think I heard it as much. There's a little bit of playfulness, but this guitar, I felt like they were on their pedals for a majority of their track, constantly tweaking the sound here and there to better fit the feeling of specific moments. And I find that to be really evocative because it creates almost a feeling of a secondary and a lead guitar, or a rhythm and a lead guitar, however you want to word it, but neither of them are really playing lead lines, though we do have a leader as far as atmospheric performance here. And I thought that was very cool because it adds a layer of, shall I call it, simplicity? Possibly. This guitarist didn't do as much as this guitar. It gave us a foundation, a home to understand just how much is happening over here. And as we can see, by having a fairly solid foundation, whenever this moves, we can see how far it's moved from. If they're moving together, the distance doesn't change. It creates less variability and a less dynamic work. But because one is a bit more static and the other isn't, we end up being able to hear the vast differences that's going on. It also creates a duality. As I've talked about earlier, we have the narrator versus the atmosphere. Here we have two guitars in opposition doing two totally different things. It allows more strife, more dissonance, more grit, more clashing to happen on this track than if they were both playing the same thing but harmonizing with each other. It's all of these things that create this feeling of disconnect and duality on this track that ends up making it feel as gritty and, I don't know, dirty as it is. It's not just any one thing. Every single element comes together to craft the atmosphere, the melody, and the narration. And I'm a big fan of how it all comes together. I quite enjoyed this. I'm going to see if I can find some lyrics for this, and then we're going to wrap this one up. All right. Now I had to decipher the lyrics myself. I couldn't find any documentation of them online. There are a couple of words, I think like 5 or 6 that I couldn't get, but fairly confident in my ability to hear the rest of the words, which is fantastic. I love music that is produced well enough to pick up individual things like guitars, drums, bass, and words. And I think the best part is the song doesn't really give up too much of the grit in order to have this clarity in the production. It balances it all really nicely. Anyways, I don't know what the song is about. There's a lot of figurative speech in it that makes me think there's a secondary layer to this, but on the surface, what I'm getting out of it is someone dealing with a loss of self, a loss of memory, possibly. That is actually stated very clearly. It says, can you tell me where my mind goes? Memory seems like a shadow. So that's very clearly stated, but we also have the opening line, which is, you've been running through the streets trying to find the missing me. And I think that's interesting. Someone else is trying to find who I am, or maybe the parts of me that I'm missing. And for me, memory is like a shadow. It's a part of me, sure, but a vague silhouette at best. Not really giving the true information of a moment, just a vague feeling of what that moment was. It ends with, what once was gone is now lost below. And I think this is interesting. We don't return back to this idea until the end of the track, talking about an entrance falling into an open something. This is one of those words I couldn't quite discern. And it says that it's all burning down, to not be found, so hold them in your hand like rustling sand. I think this is very interesting because sand very quickly falls through your fingertips. You can, of course, hold some of it, but especially with it being rustled, possibly by wind of sorts, you're not going to hold on to it for very long. It ties into this idea of getting a vague sense of what something is, but not holding on to that feeling or that memory long enough to actually remember it. Fleeting memories is what I get out of a lot of this. We do actually bring up an hourglass earlier on, which I feel like was supposed to be bringing up time of some sort, but it is surrounded by a word that I think I really need to understand how the hourglass works into this. But I do think that bringing up time in general, the distance between us and our memories and how our human minds can deteriorate over time, and converting all this into rustling sand, which of course hourglasses have sand in them. There's a lot of cool layers going on here that all reinforces and informs different parts of the lyrics. There is something in the middle, though, I'm not entirely sure about. This was a very cool moment. There's 3 lines here, and the first word of each of the first 3 lines have a separation feeling. It isn't necessarily stereo, like I had mentioned earlier, but it is a doubling of it, not a perfect doubling. So you get a little bit of inconsistency between the 2 recorded lines, and then the second word to come in the rest of the sentence is just a single track. Maybe it is double tracked, but more accurately, where both of the tracks are lined up perfectly. Regardless, we have this feeling of slight blurriness into perfectly lined up, and then slight blurriness into perfectly lined up. And I thought that was a very cool idea. It says, you overcame and you seen what has been done through the static noises. And I think static noise is an interesting way to talk about lost memory, to know that there's something there, but you don't have access to it. Static noise reminds me of scrambled channels back in the 90s. Just the black and white snow on TV. You know there's something there, and maybe even your receiver is going to pick up parts of it, but it's all been scrambled. You're not actually going to be able to make anything out of it. But then it says, you can hear your voice come through, maybe, to have the choice to choose. And I'm really curious how this works into everything else. I'm wondering if it's that one word that I'm not too sure about. But it's interesting too that so much of this is around the narrator, someone trying to help the narrator talking about their experience. But here we talk about a choice that the second party has. A choice to choose. And I don't know how this works into everything else, but I did talk about an antagonistic duality in the music, about a narrator and their atmosphere. And I think that a narrator contending with their mind certainly matches that feeling. But even going beyond that, talking about this static noise of the memories, a lot of the grittiness and dissonance in this track, stuff that feels harmonious at one moment and then falls apart the next as intense dissonance is used to finish that line, feels like being on the verge of remembering something and then not being able to actually recall it. The destruction of memory, static noise. I mean, I talked about this song being noisy. We're going from a visual noise to a sonic noise, and those metaphors certainly overlap. I'm really enjoying this. I've got to check out more, see what else Basic Pigeon's done. I mean, I'm a sucker for grungier, alt-rock kind of stuff anyways, so this was right up my alley, but I also think that there's a lot of intentionality and intelligence to this process. A lot of grunge is just angsty, and I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons I love grunge. Sometimes it's just fun to be angry at stuff, but I think this is showing a very cool way to use that flavor of music in a different direction, and I'm really enjoying how everything locks in together, even though I feel like I only have 70% of this puzzle figured out. These are my thoughts, though, on Basic Pigeon's Rustling Sand. What do you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this track? Let me know. Throw that stuff down with anything else you'd like to add into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Along that, you'll be able to find any links for Basic Pigeon that I can find, Bandcamp, social medias, YouTube pages, whatever. That's all going to be in there. If they have a link in bio, such as Linktree, I'll throw that in the description box as well. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. If you head on over to any of their pages, like, subscribe, heart, star, thumbs up, whatever it is, that'll help them with their algorithm on that website. Show them some love from the critical reaction community. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, with the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you watch my videos.